thing here since we have a small group here. So, Fidaf, if you come on and Lost, and Laura is our narrator this week, and I'm going to have Atlantica as both of the Durgas toward the end of what we're reading, and Rocky is Doland, and Betty, of course, you're Belphoebe. So it appears that I'll be, since Mark is not here, I don't see him, I guess I'll be Artigal. And yeah, I believe that's everyone. So if everyone is up here, I'll do a recap of last week. Harold Shea's poetic contribution has successfully waylaid the blatant, and Belphoebe has departed to trim the ears from the morsels she's killed. Harold and Reed Chalmers encounter the master magician Dolan, and Chalmers presses Dolan with his conjuring of a vegetarian dragons, 100 in number. The two ask Dolan how they can join the chapter of magicians. Dolan explains and says that the meeting is in days. He then invites them to his this week, starting with chapter 6.
Dolan, in the form of a stallion, trotted in front, back in his saddle, and watched the stallion's ears carefully merged.
Doing all right, aren't we, Doc?
So, but I admit to being somewhat apprehensive as to what will happen if both the companions and the chapter of magicians learn we've been cooperating with the other party. This playing both ends against the middle may get us in trouble.
Maybe,
said Shay. They rode on in silence. Once a tiger glided out from between the trunks ahead. Gustavus and Adolphus, both rapidly approaching nervous breakdowns, tried to bolt from the trail. Dolan turned himself from a stallion into its buffalo. The tiger slunk off snarling. This was low when the trail made a right-angled bend and dipped under a huge oak door was set into the earth. Dolan, again in his natural form, waved a hand, and the door flew open.
Fear not for the safety of your mounts. An invisible wall which none may penetrate without my warrant surrounds this place.
Shay, dismounting, said,
that ought to be nice for keeping the mosquitoes out.
Good Prentice, how true. Is it not sad that a man of genius must concern himself with petty moils and worries?
The air was stuffy inside. The first thing Shay saw was a huge pile of dirty dishes. Dolan was evidently not the neat type of bachelor. Beyond was an object that made his scalp prickle. It was the life-size nude statue of a young man, stiff at one side of the room, emitting a faint bluish glow. It held aloft a torch, which Dolan set alight. The enchanter noticed Shay's glance of inquiry.
A former apprentice of mine. I found he was a spy from Queen Gloriana's court, where a few of those high-born grandees practice a kind of magic they call white. So there he stands, with all his sensations alive, and the rest of him dead. Hey, Roger, I'm really
He pinched. Sorry.
I'm really the best humorist in the chapter when I'm in the mood. Let me show you my collection of Mathemaics.
What's a malamy?
Dolan looked at him hard, then decided it was a kind of joke and laughed. He began taking bottles off a shelf and holding them up to the light. Each contained a human figure about an inch tall.
Homunculi from the hand of great Master Malamy himself. He specialized in this art, and none other has been able to shrink folk to so small a size. Even I, Dolan, cannot equal his art. This is the finest collection of his figures in existence. It only wants a blonde Saracen. Busy-Rain has one, but he will not yield it, though I have offered him a water-fay, which his own collection lacks. He insists that water-fays are not permanent, since any accident will bring water in contact with the bottle, and they can work a spell of their own and so escape. You see how things fall short of perfection, even for the greatest of us. But come in, good sirs, and seat yourselves in my cabinet. Only wear a cockatrice as you go down this passage.
Cockatrice?
Aye, a rare, priceless idea of Busy-Rain's. All masters of the chapter are supplied with them. They are just outside our inner cabinets and under an enchantment, so they may not look on any member of the chapter or his friends. But should any of Gloriana's people essay to enter, the cockatrice looks on them and they turn to stone.
Dolan opened a door
Sorry.
away down a deep lighted passage. Behind bars at one side, the beast walked to and fro with a clatter of its scaly tail. It turned its head this way and that. The stench made Shay want to vomit. Over his shoulder he saw Chalmers' lips moving. He hoped it was with a protective counterspell, not prayer. Dolan's voice floated back.
Had to get them after Cambina. One of those white magic practitioners got into Malamy's cabinet and drowned him in a pool of alkahest. Thank Lucifer she married that oaf, Sir Campbell, and the marriage cost her some of her powers.
The door banged behind them. Shay gasped for air as though he had swum up from the bottom of the ocean. The table was ready, and the food, thank heaven, thought Shay, not too highly spiced. Whittling at a steak, he asked,
What's this meat? It's good.
Fried losel.
Shay saw Chalmers halt a mouthful in midair. He felt himself gag momentarily. It was, after all, on the borderline of cannibalism. And after the cockatrice, he forced himself to go on eating. Squeamishness right now was a luxury. Dolan poured out some wine, sat back, and, rather to the traveler's astonishment, produced and lit a clay pipe.
Aye, competition is the curse of our business, one playing against another, and those cursed companions of Gloriana making sad work of us all. That's how matters stood till Busy-Rain organized our chapter. Why, I mind me, I had a very good thing once, very good. Found a man of property who wanted a love philter. I made it for him, and he refused to pay. As he was more ass than human, I promised him his ears should grow an inch a day. With the price doubled for each inch, they grew till he got me to take the spell off. I told you I was a good deal of a humorist. Well, what does he do but go to Malengo, who gives him a counter spell at half price? No more of that now.
Shay had
Look
a
here.
question.
Magicians all cooperate so well. What went wrong at Saturane's tournament? That girdle wouldn't stay on the false florimel, or on Duessi either, for that matter. I should have thought Busy Rain would see to that.
Yeah, briskly questioned, Springle. The trick with the girdle was doubtless Duessa's doing. It's in her style. She tried to remove the enchantment already on it, but when she found she couldn't do that, clapped another atop, so it would fit nobody. But Florimel's case was an error. I fear me much. Especially if in good sooth Busy Rain had sent for her. Nothing would gall those high knights and ladies of the court half so much as having one of their queens of beauty approved chaste by the test of the girdle to live with an enchanter. But now, alack, there's a doubt.
Shay saw Chalmers start and run his tongue around his lips at the mention of the connection between Rain and Florimel. He questions about the chapter to give Chalmers a chance to recover. But now Dolan shut up like a clam with suspicious glances. Shay had uneasy memories of the copies and the spy in the outer room. The magician finally rose.
"'Tis time we retired, eh, magical sirs? 'Twere wise to set out for Busy Rains tomorrow. If we arrive ere the meeting be called, I'm sure that my connections and the skill in intrigue for which I'm known will enable me to secure your election."
Hey, Doc, you asleep?
Another.
Merciful heavens, no, not in this place. Is he?
If he isn't, that's a damn good magical snore. Say, can't we do something about that poor guy he made into a statue?
It would be injudicious to attempt it, Harold. Moreover, I'm not certain how. It would jeopardize our whole plan of campaign.
I didn't know he had one. Are we stringing along with him?
I suppose we must if we really intend to help Queen Gloriana and the companions. I may also mention Florimel. Dolan remarked that she was made of snow, created. I find it difficult to credit and rather awful. I fear we must join this chapter and bore from within, as it were.
I suppose that the chapter explains why the land of Fairy is sort of running down.
Yes, the enchanters had just discovered the...
Say, Doc, if the chapter was formed a year ago, Fairy Queen time, and it had already been started when which was 4 centuries ago, Earth time, Fairy time must be much slower than ours. If we go back, we'll land somewhere in the 25th century, along with Buck Rogers.
If we go back. The curvature of the space-time vectors is uniform. There might be sine curves in the vectors, you know.
Never thought of it. Say, how come your dragon spell was so extremely successful?
Chalmers permitted himself an under-the-breath chuckle.
A property of the mathematics of magic. Since it's based on the calculus of classes, it is primarily qualitative, not quantitative. Hence, the quantitative effects are determinate. With my present skill, I can't locate the decimal point. Here, the decimal point was too far rightward, and I got 100 dragons instead of 1. And 1,000.
Shay lay a moment digesting that thought. Then,
Can't you do something about that?
I don't know. Apparently, the professionals learn by experience just how much force to put into their animations. It's an art rather than a science. If I could solve the quantitative problem, I could put magic on a scientific basis. I wish, Harold, that tomorrow you could manage to distract Dolan for long enough to allow me to possess myself of one of his textbooks. This place is such a hurrah's nest that he's certain not to miss it.
The three riders, Dolan had conjured up a horse because, he said, taking the form of one for a long journey would be fatiguing. Had been going for miles through lots of wood. They saw deer, but no other living creatures. Conversation was scarce till they came out on a road, once wide and well graded, now much overgrown. Shay reasoned that this was one sign of how the enchanters were getting the best of the fairy knights. He pushed his mount alongside the magician.
With your superlative powers, Dolan, I wonder they didn't elect you head of the chapter instead of Busy Rain.
I could have had the post at good cheap. But I would not strive and moil for it. I'm really a very good judge of human nature, so I arranged Busy Rain's election, knowing he would do it well.
You must be perfect.
Just about, my prentice friend, is a weak phrase. I am perfect. I've no doubt that people in ages to come will date the history of true wizardry from my entry into the field.
Modest, too.
Too modest, I sometimes think. Yet do I guard against such affectation. Hola, here's an encounter.
An armored horseman had appeared at the far end of the defile through which they were riding. His lance came down, and he trotted toward them. Dolan cried,
10,000 devils! 'Tis Artegall himself! Flee, or we are undone!
Looking a bit undone himself, the magician whirled his horse sharp round on its hind legs. A woman's voice behind them called,
Stand, all of you.
Belphoebe was perched on a rock at the side of the defile, covering them with bow bent full.
To the air!
Screeched Dolan, the last word going beyond human pitch as he changed to hawk and flap slanting upward. There was the flat snap of the bow, the whistle of the arrow, and there was a puff of feathers. Down hurtled the hawk, changing to Dolan with an arrow through his arm as he fell. He landed plop in a soft spot. Shay observed that these people really knew something about swearing in the minute before Artegall's lance jabbed him.
Dismount, renegades!
Roared the knight. It seemed the best thing to do. The man was as big as Campbell, cased in steel, yet moved quickly. Besides, Belphoebe had another arrow, already nocked. Artegall pushed up his visor to show a stern, swarthy face with a broken nose. He produced a couple of loop chains, which he slipped over the victims' heads, tightening and locked.
You're in arrest.
What for?
For judgment by the High Justice of the Court of Her Majesty, Queen Gloriana.
Chalmers groaned.
Well, the Haas means the death penalty if we're found guilty.
Then I'll take low.
You had better not ask it. You probably has the privilege of justice himself, which means he can sentence you to about 5 years in prison right here. He probably would.
Belphoebe had come down from her rock.
Dolan, by the splendor of heaven, I bear witness, Sir Archibald, that when I met this pair in Lazowood but yesterday, they were asked their magicians. Guard the young one well, he bears a power which I doubt not has some enchantment on it.
Say you so? By my holidom, we are all well met, then. A pretty gift for the Queen's justice. Let's see that little sword.
He yanked Shay's baldric up over his head, nearly taking off an ear. He climbed back on his horse, holding the end of the chains. The prisoners had no choice but to trot along behind him. Chalmers managed to whisper,
Don't try to tell them we're on the right side. Britomart will clear us if necessary. We must retain Dolan's confidence.
They plodded on. The more Chalmers thought about it, the less he liked the idea of being dragged off to the fairy court for judgment. If they were released with Britomart's help, any enchanters they met afterward might reasonably ask them how they came to escape when Dolan was condemned. Of the master magician's condemnation, there could be little doubt. Artegall looked at him with pure detestation. Belphoebe trotted along beside them, was amusing herself by catching the enchanter's eye, putting one hand around her neck and making strangling sounds. The great Dolan did not seem to be enjoying it. Shay was admiring Belphoebe's springy stride. Anything Chalmers did would have to be on his own. Fortunately, Chalmers had succeeded in purloining and sneaking a look into one of Dolan's textbooks that morning. There was a simple weakness spell in it. Not much of a spell, lasting only a few hours, and easily guarded against it. One knew it were coming, if one knew it were coming. But it required no apparatus. On 12 blades of grass, a small piece of paper, some water. Chalmers stooped and pulled up the grass blades as he stumbled along, holding them in his mouth as though he merely wanted something to chew on. He slipped a hand inside, ostensibly to scratch, really to tear a page corner from Dolan's book. This also went into his mouth. Saliva ought to be a fairish substitute for water. He mumbled the incantation. If it worked, Artegall and Belphoebe ought to be weakened enough to let the prisoners escape. Shay decided that he liked the little spray of freckles across Belphoebe's nose, but that it was difficult to admire a girl who had a bead drawn on one's right kidney with a longbow. He would like to see more of Belphoebe. She had about everything, including an adventurous spirit, not unlike his own. Why the devil was he so tired? He could barely drag one foot after the other. He should be hardened to strenuous living by now. Belphoebe was drooping, too. The spring had left her walk. Even the horse's head hung. Artegall swayed in his saddle. He made one monstrous effort to balance himself, overcompensated, and slowly fell into the road with the dignity of a toppling factory chimney. The crash halted the procession. The horse sat down jerkily and sprawled beside its rider, its tongue lolling out. Chalmers and Dolan followed suit, their chains jingling. Article heaved himself up on one elbow.
Sorcery! The rascals have tricked us. Skewer them, Belphoebe.
The girl fumbled with her bow. Chalmers rolled over and reached hands and knees.
Come on, Harold. Rouse Dolan. Oh. Yeah, I wish to keep these spells within bounds.
Shay tried to leap over Dolan, lost his balance, and fell across the magician. Dolan grunted as Shay's knees dug into him, but he made his hands and knees. The three prisoners set off down the road in that fashion. Shay looked back. Belphoebe was still on her feet, trying to draw the bow, but lacking strength to pull it more than a few inches. She aimed up and let fly at random. The recoil her backward. The arrow soared in a whispering parabola and thwunked into the seat of Dolan's pants with just enough force to stick. The magician yelped and increased his to almost a mile an hour.
Hurry! They're coming after us.
Belphoebe was crawling along at a fair rate, regardless of the abrasion of her bare knees. Behind her, Article brought up the rear of the bizarre parade like some monstrous, tailless lizard. In his armor, he could barely move.
Phoebe's gaining.
That sorrows me not.
He finished a knife with a nasty expression, finished a knife from his boot.
Hey, not that.
And wherefore not?
While Shay was trying to think of a reasonable answer, a man in a kilt appeared at the side of the road. For a moment he stared in astonishment at the singular procession, then put a willow whistle in his mouth and blew.
The Dagurga, the Dadurga, how are we to be caught thus?
A swarm of the wild men came trotting trunks. All wore tartan kilts. With them were a number of lean, rough-coated dogs. The 5 crawlers were efficiently bowled over and frisked for weapons. Shay found himself looking into the ugly, bearded face of a gigantic redhead who moved a rusty broadsword back and forth an inch from the prisoner's throat as though he were sawing. The redhead seemed to think it was funny.
Sure, Anne, is it not a strange thing to find them so? The folk would be taking poison to make them so weak. Do we be taking them back entire, or just their heads to put in the wall now? Shame on you, Sean. 'Tis now since the gods have had a proper sacrifice. 'Tis a lack of proper reverence you show, I'm thinking.
Shay could have thought of 1 or 2 terms more appropriate than lack of reverence. But he was not consulted. He was tied up and suspended from a pole. For the next hour or so, as the carriers of the pole jounced along, the pain in his wrists and ankles were too exquisite for him to think coherently. They followed deer trails, ultimately emerging into a clearing with tents around it. The Dadurga were evidently on a raiding expedition. There were no women or children to be seen. The captives jumped in a row near a rough-hewn wooden altar with ominously dark stains down its sides.
Can't you work a spell, Dolan?
Aye, as soon as I recover from this cursed weakness. Malediction on the bungling knave who clipped us in it.
I'm afraid I was responsible.
May Beelzebub fly away with you then. After this, stick to your dragon juggling tricks and leave true magic to the great Dolan. Was it not the grass and paper spell?
Yes.
True, I recognize the symptoms, Hark. 'Twill not wear off for hours, and by that time we shall be dead as Judas Iscariot. Ah, 'tis foul that the greatest master of magic the world has seen should come to an end thus, like a netted herring. The tragedy of it makes me weep.
He lapsed into gloomy silence. Shay thought desperately, what could they do? If neither the wily Dolan nor the powerful Article could help, the case appeared hopeless. Another last-minute rescue from outside would be too much of a coincidence to hope for.
And
Three
at this
men.
point, I believe we should stop. I'll need another list of characters, including the chief and so forth, for the next reading.
Well, you could assign it real fast.
Yeah, you assign it.
And who would take the chief?
Oh, let's see.
The sheep or the
The,
chief?
the chief of the Dodurga.
What about, is Atlantia a Dodurga?
Yes, she's two. She's shot in
Okay.
the first.
Okay. And does she speak again with the chief?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, I'll be a chief.
Okay. We can continue. She could be. Atlantica is the except the chief. Okay.
And does that include the druid?
The
Or
druid
not?
is. I think
Oh,
that
is
is the chief.
Oh, okay,
I
gotcha.
believe.
Okay.
Is the druid the chief?
Yes,
Is that what you... Okay.
I believe so.
Okay, I'll be the
Chalmers
druid and the...
Chalmers, say Chalmers doesn't have any parts on this page.
Okay.
Oh, well, then why doesn't Lost be the chief?
Okay, that's fine. I'm sure the chief has further Terry further on. I'm not sure where it goes.
I think we're at the... still with the narrator, aren't we, Laura?
Yes, we 3 men in white long and white robe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we continuing?
Appear.
Oh, okay. Very good. I thought we were... 3 men in long white robes, absurdly garlanded with leaves, came out of the tent. One of them thoughtfully whetted a long knife. The sound it made on the stone was hard to bear. The one went over and looked down at the captives. The amiable-looking chieftain remarked,
Sure, 'tis a likely lot they are, isn't it? Mad living.
They'll for a chance at lot, they'll do. The 2 younger are the handsomest. We take them first. But if it's so weak they are, how shall we ever get them to walk to the altar?
A couple of the lads will support them. Albara, would you be getting your pipes?
the Dodurga had formed a circle in the clearing. One of the druids stood with his arms out and face to the sky, chanting, while another gestured symbolically over the altar. A third marched round the clearing, followed by the bagpiper. The piper cut loose with a sound like 1,000 angry beehives. It seemed to Shay that a procession of ghostly figures was following the two marchers, floating in some medium of faint iridescence that made their forms and even their existence uncertain. The Durga bowed low as priest and piper passed, and stayed bent over until that trail of misty things had gone by. It was extremely interesting. Shay wished he were in a position to appreciate it without being dominated by the thought that these were probably his last of impressions. He wondered if the gods of the Durga had something in common with the ancient Celtic deities. By the great horn spoon, he had an idea. A barbarian was cutting his bonds. Two others heaved him and Belphoebe to their feet and supported them by the arms. Their expressions were of rapt ecstasy. Shay muttered out of the side of his mouth,
Hey, Phoebe, if I get you out of this, will you call a truce till we can explain?
The girl nodded. The druid with the knife took his place at the altar. Another came over to the captives, faced out, and started to lead them, summoning all his strength. Shay barked.
Hey! Priest!
The druid turned. He had a kindly expression.
Now, laddie, it's no good shouting. Sure, honor to be the gods.
I know it.
Hello?
But you don't think the gods will be satisfied with a bunch of weak fish? Yes, do you?
True enough for you. But the God is the best he has. In faith, you are that.
You could make us better, though. We're under a spell. You're a pretty good magician. Why not take this weakness off us?
The druid's expression showed cunning.
If it's not for ours. But 'tis rare good sense you speak. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. And it's 6 o'clock.
Well, you were cutting out.
Yeah,
so
you're
I'll
cutting out
finish
quite a bit.
I'll finish the last line, I guess, or there's a little.
Well,
bit
no,
more.
we could stop now because it's a pretty big cliffhanger.
You want to leave it?
Cliffhanger.
We can just go back a little bit next week and go back to where they were being walked up, and Shay says something like to Belphoebe about the truce. I mean,
Sounds like a good plan.
Okie dokie.
Okay. Thank you.
yes, thank you all. This is so much fun. I'll see you in World, and